Dane and Adar froze, both from cold and horror, as they looked upon what remained of their adventuring companion as he laid before them in the mud-ridden street. The two remaining members of the original adventuring party slowly raised their heads to look upon the ruthless monster they now found themselves at the mercy of. But the impending horror they expected did not arrive. Instead, they were greeted to the shark man's toothy smile one last time, before he spoke, his words piercing through the numb blanket of shock deafening the two.
I hope that got the message across. Now get some rest. Tomorrow, I want you to report to the warehouse over on the docks for branding. From now on, you work for me.
And with nothing more needing to be said, Dries Toothaker turned back to his gang of Sharken, and with another flash of purple emitted from his warhammer, they were gone. As the dwarf and dragonborn slowly began to stir from their traumatized trance, they noticed their small kobold had began poking at the leftover brain spilling from Zook's skull, before exclaiming to them both,
I think he's dead!
Now, as Dane and Adar were left with the even shorter body of Zook, they were of two minds on what to do with him. On the one hand, he had been with them since the beginning of their adventure, so they decided they couldn't just leave his remains to rot out on the street. But, considering everything he's put them through recently, they decide leaving him to rot in the back of the Shady Tavern will do just fine. After taking out the trash, the two of them decide it may be within their best interest to flee, faster than players can shout dark vision the very second their dungeon master even thinks the word cave. Speaking of darkness, Dane and Adar, plus their empty display case of brain cells, decide to head right for the city gates and try to sneak out under the cover of nightfall. But Dane and Adar's hearts sank as they caught sight of the city guards, seemingly waiting for them once they got there. They are not so kindly encouraged to stay put and see the sights for a while. As the weight of what they've just gotten themselves into starts to press upon them, they both decide to slouch their way back to the poor woman with the doppelganger husband before they turn in for the night. Being as late as it is, the party is fortunate the worried wife chose to stay up and wait for her husband to finally return home. Knowing she must be tired, they decide to do her the courtesy of skipping over the details and simply tell her that the father of her child is dead. Taking her stunned silence as a non-verbal request to continue, they also mention that she and her child have been living with the monster that's been wearing his face. Then they quickly leave without another word, so that she can focus on sleeping tonight. For some odd reason, the party themselves don't seem to sleep so well. Yet they decide to turn it to their favour by heading out early in the morning to the branding warehouse, as they feel somewhat obligated to make a good first impression for the notorious street gang. Upon their arrival, they are thrilled to see that Dries also wanted to make a good first impression. They admire the decorations Dries had hung up for them on the chains of the warehouse ceiling. Just a shame those decorations came in the form of all those who had previously opposed the Sharkman. Dane and Adar joined the crowd of the other conscripted victims to watch as a group of Sharken dragged a rugged and beaten half-orc from his cell. The half-conscious half-orc couldn't even get his bearings before they threw him into a pit with another Sharken, who started using him as a personal punching bag for all to see. Yet the roars and cheers of the Sharken audience were quickly silenced, as the half-orc, as beaten and abused as he was, still managed to land a sudden uppercut against the Sharken's jaw, and promptly knocked him flat. Just before the Sharken could get back on his feet and literally tear the man in half over the transgression, Dries called him off from the railings above, giving his personal approval to the half-orc and allowing him to join the new recruits instead. After the half-orc was sent to join the back of the line, right behind Dane and Adar, the branding process began. By the time it was over, everyone came out of it with tears in their eyes, and an admittedly cool-looking magical shark fin burned into their skin. Dries then began a surprisingly decent speech, informing everyone that this brand now offers them the respect and protection that a member of the Tooth-Takers can expect, and provided they do their part, they will be supported by the gang while they pursue their goal to one day take down the corrupt Centaur government in the city. And as a nice bonus, they will all be paid 5 times the average daily income while they work for him. For the party's first job, they are tasked with heading to the mansion of a Centaur political figure, who is currently across island visiting Lebrie's famous magical emporium. The idea is for them to sneak in and find a safe containing an immovable rod that the gang would like to reclaim. Without Zook to bolster their numbers or ego anymore, Dries simply has the half-orc in line behind them join the party. After being instructed to press against their new shark fin brands if they run into any serious trouble, the party has the opportunity to get to know the half-orc a little on their way to the job. They learn he is a paladin named Pelin, and apparently that's merely an amusing coincidence. Less amusing is Pelin's life story. As the others learn, he broke his oath very early into his career, when his blatant greed and messy morality got in his own way. Ever since, he's been a washed-up alcoholic with rather self-destructive tendencies and a blatant me-first attitude. Deciding that travelling in silence the rest of the way might be the best for all of them, the party make their way through the streets of Dale, and they start to get a better feel for the massive crime-ridden city that dwarfed the size of Bristol 3 times over. The party waded their way through the smug superiority polluting the air of the upper districts, and soon arrived before the mansion they were looking for. Realizing the suspicious lack of guards must have been the work of the Tooth-Takers, they didn't waste a second as they broke their way inside. Once inside, they quickly fought through a magical security system filled with animated sets of armor that had a very hands-on approach to removing intruders. Just when they thought they were finally safe, a certain rug at the top of the stairs came to life under Dane's feet and tried to smother him. Once the house finally stopped picking on the dwarf, the party was able to find and break open the safe that they had been looking for, able to obtain both a heavy purse of gold that Pelin quickly swipes, and the immovable rod that they came for. After a quick interlude to play with the physics-defying stick, they made their way back out to the street, only to be immediately questioned by some particularly aggressive city guards. The party, sensing this could go south very quickly, tapped their shark fin brands for backup, more frantically than my therapist pressed the red button when I mentioned using water instead of milk in my cereal. As a delightful surprise for the party, it wasn't the Sharkin thugs that arrived with a get-out-of-jail-free card, but Dries himself. Swiftly addressing the situation, Dries sent half the guards back down the street. Specifically, their top halves. Starting to see the perks of having an 8'5" murderous gang leader on speed dial, the grateful party hand over the immovable rod to their new best friends. And even when Pelin attempts to lie about the gold he also collected from the safe, Dries just laughs it off and lets him keep it. Once the Shark Man leaves them to enjoy the rest of their day, Pelin immediately begins to loot the bodies of the guards before anyone else can get their fair share of the loot. The others can't help but wonder if their new green friend has any goblin in his heritage. By the time the loot goblin is finished picking the corpses clean, he ends up finding a note on one of the guards' bodies. Thankfully, not leading them to another doppelganger trap this time, the note is simply from a living daughter, who happens to make mention of her mother's recent funeral at the cemetery by the Church of Sunlight nearby. Upon reading the note out loud, Pelin instantly takes off for the cemetery without a word, leaving the clueless party to follow along behind him. To the party's horrified disappointment, they watch the former paladin walk right by the very church that he once served, and without hesitation, start digging up the grave of the mother mentioned in this letter, in order to steal the valuable wedding ring and the other jewelry that he can pawn off later. They returned to the Royal Stallion for another night's rest, only to be awoken early the next day by a kinku knocking at the door, with its mimicry ability allowing it to relay a message left for the party in Doris's voice that instructs them to go around today collecting protection money from the few addresses that haven't yet been visited. As if it weren't bad enough that Dane and Adar now found themselves carrying out the same job that nearly got them killed, they notice one of the first addresses on the list belongs to the doppelganger's wife. So with his head hung in shame, Dane soon finds himself knocking at the door of this poor woman who has already been through more than enough, and has to ask her to pay up on behalf of the local gang. After the mandatory verbal flogging, Dane collects what little she can afford to pay right now, and leaves with the rest of the party. Palin tries to give him a pep talk about letting it all go and to just think about the money. As they continue collecting, they soon find themselves at the last location on the list by the afternoon. Oddly, however, it isn't a home they find themselves knocking on the door of this time, but rather a small rundown warehouse. It's only when they are invited inside, however, that they find themselves once again in the middle of yet another ambush. Yet, as the ambushers lock eyes with the party, rather than use the element of surprise to secure their kills, they instead soften their expressions and loosen the grips on their weapons. The leader of the small group steps forward to greet them, welcoming them as if they were family. It is then that the party notices they also have shark fin branding. They admit they were expecting a sharkin to come around collecting the money. Once the party confirms they are the ones who took down the sharkin who had been previously collecting the coin, the odd group seem even more relieved. They reveal themselves to be the start of a rebellion against Doris and his Tooth-Takers, made up of the conscripted victims the Tooth-Takers had claimed. They even have the support of the Centaur government, including their president, a Centaur named Andrew Linnell. The rebels then offer out their hands to the party, offering them the chance to take down Doris once and for all. But as the party looks amongst each other, they realise they might just have other plans, and they slowly begin to press against their shark fin brands.